Looking back at some of my favorite books and movies, there's that moment when the characters' lives are about to change forever. They aren't the character the journey will make of them. In fact, the real journey hasn't even begun yet. But into every hero's life, there comes a time of choosing. Maybe it's a call at 3 in the morning. Possibly they just opened a candy bar and found a golden ticket. And when it's done right, I can't help but get goosebumps. I'm Robert Jones, the story detective, and today we're going to be taking a look at the second major inciting incident in the first quarter of your novel. Your hero is about to get a call that changes everything. For those of you who like to revisit your favorite stories, you know exactly what the call makes you feel. Whether you get goosebumps or feel that tide of emotion well up inside of you because you understand what's about to happen. It evokes those feelings every time, doesn't it? Your favorite character is soon going to embark on that journey, which turns them into everything you love about them, all that has inspired you, and countless others, to take that journey along with them, sometimes again and again. As a writer, you probably imagined your future readers doing likewise. This is a pivotal moment worth examining further. The hero is trapped between the life they know and a very intimidating circumstance. That might be looked at as an opportunity within the approaching chaos. It's a call and can take many forms. It might make your hero curious, or maybe they explode with joy or feel impending terror. Either way is the catalyst for change. Most people fear change, for better or worse. That's human nature. We learn to live with the routine of habits, even if the habits aren't good ones. And when good fortune does smile upon us, we sometimes get a little nervous, don't we? We question such things. Is it for real? What will happen next? Will I be happy or brokenhearted? This is life. It's also psychology. In order to better understand how deeply this moment penetrates the life of a character, we're going to be taking a closer look from the same three examples we used in part 1 of this series. Backstory plays an important role here. All three of the following examples make effective use of backstory in establishing the character's social existence. Star Wars: A New Hope. Have you thought about Luke Skywalker's life before he became a Jedi? It's one of the oldest tropes in the book. The hero is raised by his aunt and uncle after his parents are killed. Spider-Man and Batman immediately come to mind here, except Luke is living on a farm on a desert planet in a galaxy far, far away. He's also not a science geek loser like Peter Parker. Luke's friends understand he's a great pilot. His light is already shining, but his uncle wants to hide it beneath the sand, and excuses disguised as reason for keeping him one more year on that farm. His aunt even suggests maybe they're being too hard on him. His uncle, however, remains adamant, stating he'll make it up to Luke next year. This is a lie, of course. Next year there will be another reason why Luke has to stay, or possibly his uncle believes his own lie. But it's altogether probable that he hopes once Luke's friends all leave, he'll forget those silly dreams of becoming a pilot. Okay, before we get too down on Uncle Owen, the reality here is that he's terrified for Luke's life. This is where backstory comes in. Luke's aunt and uncle are quite aware their nephew's father is still alive, in the guise of Darth Vader. And if Luke shines his light too brightly, Vader is going to notice his son is alive and try to turn him to the dark side. None of this is explained. The story doesn't go into flashbacks about character history or players we haven't met yet, which is often what separates the veteran writer from the novice. They aren't in a hurry to spill all the beans about backstory right away. We don't even know Vader is Luke's father until the second film in the trilogy, and we had to wait 2 years for that. But George Lucas knew and built Luke's life, his entire social existence, around information we would put together as the story progressed. In other words, he didn't bog the story down or waste the viewer's time up front. character histories are given when we absolutely need it, and no more than is necessary to have the character's motives make sense. The Hunger Games. Katniss Everdeen lives in what would essentially be a future version of a mining community that kept people basically as slaves throughout history. Although in District 12, the leaders of this dystopian future created serious consequences for disrupting the status quo, which is public execution. In fact, Katniss' family could end up in prison or executed as well. In my mind, she still falls under that orphan trope, in that her father is dead, and she's taken over his position as the alpha. Like Luke, Katniss isn't the average down-and-out character either. She becomes quite good with her bow, which used to belong to her father and is now hidden outside the fence, designed to keep predators out and humans inside its confines. Her father pushed those boundaries, going outside and hunting, until he was blown to bits by a landmine. So Katniss is following in her father's footsteps, because for her, the status isn't very quo. Is it risky? Absolutely. But isn't she also putting her life as well as that of her family in jeopardy? No one said your hero has to be perfect, or even very nice. Katniss cannot be complacent. Her family, her neighbors, sure, they understand the circumstances, but they are willing to live by the rules, or fear the repercussions. They've been beaten down. Possibly some even feel the folks in the Capitol know what's best. Katniss, however, wants something more than the Capitol is willing to offer, and she has to try, in spite of the fear of discovery or the potential consequences. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Harry Potter is yet another grab at the trope of the orphan who has lost his parents. Like many tropes, this one is easy to fall back on due to the built-in empathy it provides. Is it overused? Sure. But I have my favorite tropes that have been done to death, and some of you do as well. So let's move on and skip the speech about originality. Besides, it's helpful when learning craft to see how writers take a similar foundation and build on it in different ways. Let's look a bit closer at how this plays into Harry's social life. His aunt and uncle may have taken him in, but they treat him like he's beneath them, and their own son Dudley, who can do no wrong. Harry is made to feel he should be grateful for the closet beneath the stairs that they allow him to sleep in, while Dudley has 2 rooms upstairs all to himself. Much like Luke Skywalker's uncle has his reasons based in fear, the Dursleys also have their apprehensions. Here, however, they're afraid for themselves. They understand very well what Harry's heritage is, what his parents were, and this scares the hell out of them. They want no part of this. So Harry's life has been built around falsehoods. Obstacles have been built all around him, which prevent him from ever living the life he was intended to live. Simply put, the Dursleys want to keep him down by burying the past and hiding Harry in a closet with the rest of the family skeletons. A word on family skeletons. Secrets in general. Every character, especially those who are contrary, negative, or combative, have a secret, especially the villains. It's something they wouldn't want the rest of the world to know about or see. It might be hidden in their mental closet, possibly even in a real closet, or a basement, or an attic. There's a tiny room somewhere, whether real or imagined, where this secret remains under lock and key. It could be something that hurt them badly, or embarrassed them. And no matter whether it's a large thing or small, hiding it in darkness only makes it grow into a mountain, which has psychologically become immovable. This fear justifies a lot of what they do and who they ultimately become. Unlike the hero who overcomes their inner demons, your villains are the flip side of that coin, which is deeply connected to the hero's issues, which also have been passed on or withheld from them like Luke or Harry. All of this has or should be planted as part of the hero's social existence and interior problems after the hook and during the first half of your setup in the first quarter. Because when the call comes, there's social issues and those skeletons are going to start rattling. So, with that in mind, Let's make a few deductions concerning the call. Star Wars: A New Hope. Luke's call occurs when he's cleaning up the 2 droids his uncle purchased from the junk-collecting Jawas to help with work around the farm. This is, of course, R2-D2 and C-3PO. Luke notices the blaster burns on R2-D2 and realizes the droids have seen some action. So when C-3PO tells him they were part of the rebellion, this begins to link the droids with his dreams of being a pilot and getting off the dust bowl of a planet he's trapped on. Luke finds something jammed in a slot on R2-D2 and tries to free it. That's when the message begins to play. A hologram appears of a beautiful girl who is pleading for help from someone named Obi-Wan Kenobi. Luke is immediately drawn in. Of course, the girl he's immediately enamored with turns out to be a sister, but let's just say the two have an intimate connection through the Force he mistakes for attraction. Skip that whole ick factor and move right along. Luke's past, the one he doesn't know about, just crossed his path. Remember that arrow we launched in part 1 with the hook? It just whooshed past Luke, nicking him in the process. It's a wake-up call that intrigues and intimidates him at the same time. That's what the call does to the hero's status quo, their social strata, and the long-standing problems that this has caused for them. All that is challenged here. Squarely in the middle of your first quarter, questions are raised. What will Luke's uncle do when he finds out? How will Luke respond? And a clock begins ticking, because the villain hasn't been resting on their laurels during the first half of this act. On the contrary, Vader has discovered the droids were on that escape pod and have the plans he's looking for, plans that Luke just discovered. All of those questions and answers will come into play during the second half of Act 1, which we'll be discussing in the next episode. The Hunger Games. Katniss receives her call when her sister Prim's name is pulled from the lottery drawing. She volunteers to take her sister's place. This is a bit tricky in placement because the call happens before the first act reaches the halfway point. I say tricky because Suzanne Collins uses a lot of twisty business when it comes to writing in general. However, she also proves that structure is malleable. Here's what Collins did after the volunteering scene and leading up to the end of that first half of Act 1. Katniss has her goodbye scene with Gale before he's pulled away. She poses for press photos before boarding the train to the Capitol. She takes her first shower and reminisces about her father singing to the Mockingjays. And by the time Effie takes her to dinner, she can hardly keep her food down. All of which is symbolic of her attempting to digest events and finding herself internally rebelling. She's separated by degrees from the life she's been living. She is resistant. Meanwhile, the stakes are being raised in terms of her main social problem, bucking the system she hates, because now she's directly involved in their deadly game. This pulls us back to the moment her call arrived, as she watches it being recapped on TV. Katniss is essentially seeing herself from the outside, where she was, juxtaposed over where she is. What Collins did with her call, which arrives just a bit early, is unzip Katniss' social climate, dropping her into a universe that's surreal, once removed, then recaps the call on TV as Katniss hears the desperation in her own voice as she runs forward to volunteer. In this story, the arrow that was launched with the hook struck Katniss, lifted her into the air by pulling her further into the plot by the moment the train speeds towards the Capitol. Note that once again the call intrigues the reader and intimidates the hero. New opportunities have presented themselves, but she hasn't figured out what to do with them quite yet. This is exactly what the call should do, even if it occurs in a two-fisted sequence as it does here. Craft is always fascinating, and just when you think you've seen it all, there's always more. Our final example gets even more twisty. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The call for Harry is an interesting one indeed. In fact, the arrow misses Harry completely. Sound bizarre? From the standpoint of the story, it's rather unorthodox. However, from a craft standpoint, the criteria holds. It begins with a letter addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. This happens just short of the halfway point in Act 1, and we'll call this the first miss because Uncle Vernon deflects the arrow by snatching it from Harry's grasp. Later that night, Uncle Vernon tells Harry it was all a mistake and he burned the letter. The Dursleys also move Harry upstairs, giving him Dudley's second bedroom. More letters keep arriving. They're stuck in egg cartons, the cracks of doors and windows, but Harry's uncle keeps deflecting those arrows until there's an entire fusillade coming down the chimney. So they run. They go to a hotel. The letters find them. Finally, they end up at a lighthouse on an island. This is where Hagrid shows up and finally rescues Harry. What's happening here? The arrow that's meant for Harry hits Uncle Vernon instead. Harry wants to know what it's all about. He wants those letters. But his uncle keeps deflecting arrows until finally is struck hard enough to launch the entire family from their status quo. But this is all done through Uncle Vernon resisting, not Harry. Harry wants the challenge. The Dursleys do not. And since Harry is essentially a prisoner and has absolutely no control, the criteria is handed over to Uncle Vernon, who is attempting to control Harry. Vernon doesn't want the call to reach Harry out of fear there will be repercussions. One also has to wonder if there's a little bit of jealousy there. Why should this kid from a family of weirdos get any sort of recognition or power? Empathy goes to Harry by the truckloads because of his uncle's meanness and interference. But wait a minute. Should the hero get this sort of magical rescue? In most cases, I would say no. But we've seen these magical beings in the beginning. And while Harry is being mistreated throughout those early chapters, we wonder why they're allowing this to go on. After all, they placed him in the Dursleys' care to hide him from Voldemort. But how long are they going to allow him to be tortured and struggle in vain? So when Hagrid shows up at last, millions cheered. Empathy for Harry was built to such a degree that no one denied him its rescue. Such is the power of empathy, without which this never would have worked. This also probably wouldn't work in most adult fiction. However, in the YA world, there are plenty of kids who resent their social environment and dream of that magical rescue. In Harry's case, it's a bit of wish fulfillment. On the other hand, why exactly did Dumbledore allow this torture to go on as long as it did? There's a whole lot to unpack here. Maybe Dumbledore was just making sure Harry was used to torture because Hogwarts delivered plenty. But let's let that pass for the moment. The important thing here is the criteria holds. The hero's social status is challenged. It's intimidating for Uncle Vernon, who in turn intimidates Harry. The stakes grow in the minds of the Dursleys. New opportunities are presented to Harry. And as all of this happened due to Voldemort attacking the Potters, his presence is felt even though he isn't around, because we know such evil will return when the opportunity presents itself. Craft is an interesting puzzle, is it not? We've seen these three characters who are essentially orphaned and given into circumstances surrounded by secrets and hardship. The core story hasn't launched yet for any of them, but look how unique each of them are within the simulacrum of life that we call fiction. No matter what your story, I guarantee there's always a way in which the criteria can and will fit. Understanding these principles will guide you, not only to fit your plot onto the canvas of story, but to imitate life more effectively. Because the more you understand the craft, the more you understand how it touches all life psychologically. Here's a checklist for the call, for those of you taking notes. The arrow launched by the hook cuts an intimidating swath through the hero's social existence, thus involving the hero more directly and calling them to take action. The villain's plans are at the root of this and begin to trickle more noticeably into the life of the hero, causing the stakes to increase. New opportunity arises for the hero, though they don't always see them through the cloud of chaos. Meanwhile, things are building towards their final target in this series, which will launch your core story. Many believe this third and final inciting incident to be the most important of all. Personally, I think they're all equally important, or the final one would fall flat. However, only one gets to truly launch your core story, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. Until then, keep those keyboards clacking.